bro?
George, doing well, doing well. The NFL season has started. Finally, it's been so long. It's been too long, but it's good to be back here with you on Boston has entered the chat. A lot of stuff to chat about. Let's do it.
Yeah, we'll get into what's trending. We'll talk NFL football. Packers, Eagles kicking off their seasons tonight down in Brazil. And then we'll take a look into the Patriots season opener out in Cincinnati. Plus, Nick Whalen of RotoWire of SiriusXM for the NBA and fantasy football. He stops by to give us our start sits, some studs, has a take on CMC, Travis Etienne you want to hear, and an outlook on the Cowboys backfield, and also some Patriots players to target if you need them on your fantasy team. But Colin, let's get into it. Start with what's trending. The GOAT, Alex Morgan, has officially announced she is retiring from soccer. Her final match will be on Sunday. She also said she's pregnant and expecting a second child. So 35 years old, two-time World Cup winner, Olympic gold medalist as well, fifth in U.S. women's national team in goals with 123, 224 caps, made her debut for the team in 2010. In 2024, she's retiring. It's cool to see, man. Shout out to her.
Absolutely. Congratulations are in order, both for an illustrious career, also having the child on the way, like you mentioned, George. And I was just looking at social media when I saw this announcement. I was seeing the responses from fans of hers, fans of just the sport in general, and fans of the women's national team. Her and this team have impacted so many people in such a positive way. It's really cool. I love the reception that she got on social media, and obviously a fantastic career. So like you said, shout out and all the props in the world to Alex Morgan. What she was able to accomplish was pretty special, but also the impact that she had on so many people was special as well.
Yeah, how dominant U.S. women's national team has been since she came up with them. And now you look, Abby Wambach, Alex Morgan, Megan Rapinoe, they're all retired. Colin, this is my childhood. I'm like 6 years older than you, maybe. No, I think you're younger than that. I don't even want to get into it, but that is my childhood. 2010, young George, a sophomore in high school at the time, getting into soccer, following the national teams. It's awesome for her to call it a career. Now let's pivot over to football. Chiefsaholic, if people don't know, there's this guy, I'm not even going to say his name. He doesn't deserve to have his name be said, but he went by Chiefsaholic. He posed as a Chiefs super fan. He would wear like a full-on wolf outfit because that is their mascot on the sidelines and go to pretty much every game. He was Chiefsaholic on Twitter. He was in that weird realm of like super fans on social media. Anyhow, he went on a bank robbery spree for like 16 months, starting in 2022, I believe, maybe before then. Well, he was finally convicted, robbing multiple banks. He's been sentenced to 17 and a half years in federal prison. This is a weird story. This is a wonky story. Colin, I see this. This is something I followed, and I spent some time in Missouri, living in Joplin, like 4 hours just south of KC. They're super fans for the Chiefs, and I love super fans in sports. This guy was a weird fan. He was also robbing banks, so he was just a crappy human being, in my opinion. Humbly, good riddance, go 17 and a half years, and he doesn't get no parole, and he has 3 years supervised release after 17 and a half years. I'm just happy to see him getting that long-term sentence, man.
Yeah, there's super fans, George, and then there's criminals. And like obviously there's no distinction between that. There is a big distinction with this guy, of course. And look, you look into the reporting on this story. I'm not going to get into the specifics because there's some like terrifying stuff in there, like what he said to the people in the banks, all of the stuff that he was doing throughout this entire process. And I looked at the tweets that this Chiefsaholic account made. This is this guy, and he was like, I work so hard for my money. I work so hard to live an honest life. All this thing, it's all BS. Now we know all of the criminal activity that was going on behind the scenes. So yeah, I mean, good riddance is all you can really say. He did the crime. Now he's going to have to do the time, 17 and a half. He has to do it. He terrorized, individuals. He robbed banks, did all this crappy stuff, like you said. So obviously good to see him get that sentence, but an interesting and somewhat funny story on the surface, because the fact that this guy dressed up in a wolf costume and went to Chiefs games and tweeted fantastical things. Then you kind of look under the surface and you're like, wow, like this guy was a pretty terrible human being throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, like holding people at gunpoint, robbing multiple banks. And he would do these like on his way to Chiefs games. Like he would pay to go to every Chiefs game by robbing banks. Like, and he tried to give the out of like, it was like a gambling addiction, like, oh, just all these weird things. Like, yeah, he was gambling because he was making all these robberies and stuff. He also owes like almost $600,000, like to give the money back that he robbed. It was just like the trauma that would stick with people. Like just they're working their job. They're at a bank. they don't deserve to be dealt that and go through that and have that throughout their life now, just so you could go to a Chiefs game. So I was happy to see this happen. I was happy to see this come to a close. And you know how much of a you said it, Colin. I agree. Like he's not a super fan. He's a criminal, right? I said he's a crappy human. How much of a joke this person is, because people that I still follow and I know from my Missouri days of reporting there that are like big and professionals in journalism and covering Kansas City, they didn't even want to touch these stories in a way of like, I don't want to give him attention because that's what he seeks and that's what he gets. And that's what he did all of this for. So I'm happy to hear that he got this long of a sentence, and hopefully he comes out of it as a better human and just knows, just be decent. Just don't do that. Like, don't put people through that awful experience. All right, let's get into let's look to Sunday before we'll get to Friday. Let's look to Sunday before we get to Friday, Colin. There we go. Got it out. Patriots at Bengals. The debut of the Jerod Mayo era, man. This is going to be so interesting just what to see, because this is a season I go into knowing it's not about wins and losses. Jerod Mayo said it too. It's all about being competitive. That's what's successful, yada, yada. Colin, what are you going to be watching for on Sunday of stuff you want to see, of improvements for the Patriots? If they get a win, man, they should celebrate like they won the Super Bowl because no one's picking them. But overall, what are you going to be watching for in this game in a matchup with the Patriots in Cincinnati against Joe Burrow and the Bengals?
Yeah, I'll attack this from a few different ways. First things first is from the Patriots angle, and you said it right off the top, George. It's the start of the Jerod Mayo era. How is he going to actually compose himself and manage in a real game situation? If the Bengals come in and punch him in the mouth the first quarter, is he going to make adjustments with the way that he runs his offense and his defense? You know, if in theory, you know, Jamar Chase does play after the swirling storm about his situation, how are they going to deal with one of the best wide receivers in the NFL? And I do think, you know, offensively, we talk about Jacoby Brissett, and you and I have done it on this show before as well. The Patriots almost beat the Eagles last year in week 1 because anything can happen in week 1. You know, I project the Bengals to be one of the best teams in the NFL this season, but it's a long season. There is a reasonable chance that because of the Jamar Chase situation, because of a nagging Joe Burrow wrist injury, because of T. Higgins being now questionable on the injury report, the Patriots can handle this Bengals offense somewhat readily with their defense. And the question is now, can they score a couple of points? Can they control time of possession with their offensive, you know, superhero who has to be Ramondre Stevenson this season? Can they put a couple of drives together, get some key third down conversions with Stevenson and company? And they could win this game, George. That's the crazy thing about it. You know, I projected with Travis Thomas that the Bengals are going to win the Super Bowl this season. This was back over the summer, but I don't think this Bengals team in week 1 is going to be the same as the Bengals in week 14. It's going to take them some time to get there. So I could see the Patriots coming away with this one. Maybe that's the homer in me speaking, but that's what I think about the Patriots. Then real quick on the NFL side of things, just from the NFL lens, the full, you know, league lens, I'm really interested about how this Jamar Chase thing is going to go, because you remember Zach Taylor is saying, oh, he's in practice, we're gearing him up to be ready. The very next day, he was like, I got to walk back those. I shouldn't have said that, because that's not the case anymore. You know, these wide receivers, the hold in, quote unquote, with Jamar Chase, I'm really interested to see how that plays out. Will he even play in week 1? It's going to be interesting. So this is going to be a good game. A lot of people are writing off the Patriots here, and you can see why with the roster building of the Bengals versus the Patriots. But, you know, the same thing was being said about the Eagles and the Patriots last year, and the Pats kept it close with Mac Jones. So it's going to be interesting, and I'm looking forward to this game.
Yeah, it's this defense is what can carry this team. But like, no Matt Judon, no Christian Barmore. Right. We saw the reports coming from Jeremy Fowler where the Patriots are just going to take it slow with him, when like he's a long-term piece for this team. And I think for his long-term health, it's better off like take the year off. They're like kind of doing the quiet tanking the way I look at it. I understand like week 1, it comes out, everything's wonky. People are trying to get their feet under them and have consistency. But with the Bengals, like, it's still Zach Taylor, the head coach. It's Joe Burrow, the quarterback. It's Dan Pitcher, elevated from QB coach to OC. They got Trent Brown at right tackle. It's still T. Higgins. And a name that we'll all find out about on Sunday, Andres Yoshivas. He's a second-year player drafted out of Princeton, but he's a bigger guy with a 4.4 40, plays in that slot receiver role. And as of the time of this recording, Jamar Chase hasn't agreed to an extension. But if he does, if he's on a pitch count, no matter what, from what I've seen from this Patriots offense, just if the Bengals can get to 21, if the Bengals can get to 17, I think they're okay. because I don't think the Patriots can get to that. So that's where I'm watching for, can this offense look competent? Can this offensive line give Jacoby Brissett a chance? Because if this offensive line shows promise and just shows promise to get improvement, and then by week 5 and week 6, I go, oh, they're executing. Put Jerod Mayo in and then see what you got and give them real game reps. With Jerod Mayo, I just want to see how's communication, how's execution from the sidelines, how is it working with Alex Van Pelt and DeMarcus Covington, first time in the roles that they are, with AVP being a play caller and him a first-time head coach. So it's interesting. Let's go quick on this one, Colin. I mean, you kind of said, you could see the Patriots pulling it out, but what is your prediction for Sunday for the final result between the Pats and the Bengals?
Yeah, with all that being said about, there's a reasonable situation where the Patriots win. I still don't think it's going to happen. I see the Bengals putting up maybe 24, 27 points. Patriots probably going 10-13. So I'll go on the higher end of that, 27-13, the final in favor of Cincinnati. It's a tough place to play, obviously, on the road there for New England. So I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's going to be somewhat competitive, maybe in the first quarter to the first half of play, but the Bengals are going to pull it out.
Yeah, that's what I think. Like, can they keep it close? Can they at least make it a game going into the fourth? I doubt it. You said 27-13. I wrote 27-10. I'm the same thing as you, man. I said 27-13 at first, and I was like, let me dial it back. So 27-10. No matter what.
Well, there's a new kicker for New England, so there is a chance that some field goals get made in this game.
Exactly. Joey Sly is actually dependable. Just Patriots fans are hoping he doesn't kick him out of a top 3 pick or possibly the number 1 overall pick. Let's get into it and make sure also to check out Foxborough Rush. I spoke with athletic writer Paul Daner. He covers the Bengals. 21-minute convo. Paul is awesome. We previewed the matchup on Sunday. That's over on Foxborough Rush. You want to hear from him. And Paul also has some great intel on the T. Higgins situation with the Bengals, where he said he's likely going to be a free agent. That's big news for Patriots fans. The NFL has its second game of the season, Friday night, Packers versus Eagles in Brazil. This is a polarizing game. Like, Brazil is one of the most dangerous countries in the world, ranked 17th by murder rate. The players, as they've shared on both sides, Packers and Eagles as well, Colin, they've said, like, we've been told, don't leave your hotel rooms, don't do anything, don't walk around with your cell phones out, don't wear green. Great. You pick 2 teams that are literally green. My thing with this, I'm looking forward to the matchup on the field. If you're the NFL, just do better. Like, how do you put the players in this situation? More importantly, how do you put the fans in this situation? The fans in the area being in that stadium and the fans that want to travel from the States to Brazil. Like, this is just so stupid of their planning to go in an area that's so dangerous for anyone that would be attending this game. The players, luckily, because of the league and their teams, have the resources to be in a secure space and a secure hotel. The normal fan does not. If you're the NFL, what are you doing? But this is a reminder of how incompetent Roger Goodell is, how stupid he is, and how much the NFL just wants money. I'm going on a rant here, Colin. I'm pissed that they're doing this because it's just so rude. It's so unsafe. It's just not conscious of the fans that this sport is for what they're doing and put them in a place like this. So I'm excited for the game. I love Jordan Love. I think the Packers could come out of the NFC. I'm excited to see Jalen Hurts bounce back with the Eagles. There's all these distractions, and guess what? By Friday, they're going to kick off. It's going to be okay. The NFL, Colin, be better.
Yeah, the 4 words that you said in the middle of that are the most important. NFL just wants money. That's what this is all about. And they're going to keep doing this. They're going to keep expanding globally. I'm not saying that, expanding globally is a bad thing. The NFL is going to go into Madrid next year. They're expanding into different areas of the world. That's great. I do think what you mentioned about the fan experience is probably the biggest thing here. The players, I can see them being a little bit scared for their safety, but you mentioned the security. As long as they stay where they're supposed to be, and you can say staying where they're supposed to be isn't a great thing in and of itself, but, you play with the cards that you're dealt in this type of situation. If they stay where they're supposed to be, I can't imagine anything really bad happening. If something bad does happen, then we get into a whole different conversation, and then it might be time to close the book on this whole operation to begin with. But I think this is about money. This is about the NFL getting another primetime game on a Friday. There was reporting earlier this week that they want to have, Labor Day games. So the first week of the season is Thursday, then Sunday, Saturday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever. Like, they want every single day to have a primetime game because that's where they get their most money. They're not getting as much money out of 1 p.m. Sunday game than they are on a primetime Friday game. That's just a fact. So that's why they did Black Friday last year as well. So they just want money. This is a cash grab type situation, but there's better ways to go about it. Like, they could put a Friday game in Green Bay. That's fine. They could put a Friday game in Philly. That's fine. It's the same kind of thing. but they're trying to expand globally, and that I do understand. So overall, I'd say probably the execution could have been done a little bit better. But I mean, I feel like us two as members of the media and the fans as a whole probably see this too. Like this is about money. It hasn't really been about anything else. If the NFL could expand their reach globally in a way that didn't, make them any money, they're not going to do that. They're going to expand their reach globally while making cash on the side. So it's a corporation, it's a business, so it's understandable. But the safety concerns of the fans, if there are, fans from the States, from Wisconsin, from Philadelphia, from anywhere flying into Brazil, and then there's a threat to their safety, that's just inexcusable. So it is tough. I do think the matchup's going to be great, like you said. If we're going to talk about predictions, which I guess we can, I think Green Bay is going to win. I mean, does that matter more than the safety of the fans? Probably not. But the game's going to go on as scheduled regardless. So I think it's going to be a good matchup, but it probably could have been handled and executed a little bit better.
Yeah, and think of the safeties of the locals, like the Brazilians, that like they're being put into that situation as well. Like you want to grow it there, cool. Like just be smarter, not to dog on Brazil. It's just like the fact of the matter, it's a dangerous area they're putting in, and it's not pickpocketing. It's like a murder rate that makes it what is dangerous, along with everything else that can happen. Explain globally. Just be smarter with the city that you pick, let alone the countries that they go into. I am excited for this game. I'm excited to see the Packers debut. It's also a game again, 10-hour flight. That's how long it took the Packers to get there. Eagles were 9.5 hours, I believe. So basically same thing. You're putting these players in these situations. You're putting these fans in these situations, again, for the NFL to do better. But speaking of Packers, speaking of Eagles, speaking of Bengals and Patriots as well, Nick Whalen of RotoWire, he joined me on the chat to break down some start sit-ems, week 1 of fantasy football. We had a week 17 outlook on it as well. We talked some CMC. It's all right here. Check it out. He's Nick Whalen, joining Boston has entered the chat now, analyst for RotoWire, also the host on SiriusXM's channels for the NBA and fantasy football, and he's a University of Wisconsin grad, so it's always good to have a Badger on the show. Nick, thanks for taking the time, man. How are we doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, guys. Appreciate the opportunity to jump on with you, and we are, 7 hours away from NFL Week 1? I can't wait.
Exactly. It's almost here. We finally, all the talks of drafts, ADP, mocks, it's all behind us. We're in the promised land Thursday, Friday, and Sunday of football. And let's start with just getting into week 1. It's finally here. It's a first step of figuring out pretty much like who's actually good, who's bad, how offenses look, and all the guys we have with these expectations. But I want to start with the guys that you're identifying as like must starts. It may not be the popular ones. We know who you get in the first and second round, but who are like 3 guys you can say of like, these are dudes you should start week 1, especially with their matchup?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you should start Christian McCaffrey or Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson. Those guys are going to be in your lineup this week. But, I mean, with the depth at the wide receiver position in the NFL right now, I think that's where a lot of the difficult start sits are going to come, particularly in week 1. I mean, you have guys who are, legit number 1 receivers on their own team or, high-end number 2s who are going off the board as, the wide receiver 30 through the wide receiver 40 this year. Obviously, something I always tell people in fantasy leagues, if you have a flex spot, if it's a PPR league, you almost always want to try to get a receiver in that spot. Unless you went really running back heavy, they're going to have a higher floor for that flex. So a couple receivers who are maybe on that borderline this week who I like. We start with Jackson Smith-Njigba, and he was my big fantasy draft crush, especially over the last few weeks. We started to see his ADP rise a little bit, but I think that's totally warranted. You were still getting Jackson Smith-Njigba around where he finished last season. And, it felt like somewhat of a down rookie year for him, especially considering he was the first receiver off the board in that 2023 draft. But I think this is the year that he really overtakes Tyler Lockett in a big way. I mean, I think we kind of forget the level of talent that we're dealing with JSN. He had that kind of weird final season at Ohio State. I think if that final college season had gone better, he might have been a top 10 pick. I mean, he's on the talent level to me of someone like a Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze. And I love the matchup for Seattle this week. They get the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix making his first start on the road in week 1. I think this is a really, really good spot for Seattle and this new look offense to get it going. So I'm starting Jackson Smith-Njigba in as many leagues as I can. Christian Watson is another interesting one. One of those receivers who has some name value, but given the injuries over the last couple of years, there was some caution in approaching him in drafts. But I think early in the season, especially, is when I trust Christian Watson. Can that hamstring actually make it through 17 games? We will see. But Christian Watson did not have any setbacks whatsoever throughout training camp. Participated in literally every single day of practice. I'm sitting here in the state of Wisconsin. If you follow the Packers like I do, you know that has not been the case over the last couple of years. And whenever Christian Watson is on the field and whenever he's fully healthy, which he will be tomorrow night in Sao Paulo, he makes a huge difference, right? I mean, we have 4 receivers in this Packers receiver room that we like, but Christian Watson, to me, he's the skeleton key. He's the difference maker. He's the 6'4" guy with 4.3 speed, right? Nobody else, Romeo Doubs, Dontayvion Wicks, Jaden Reed, as talented as those guys are, they don't have that high level upside of Christian Watson. So I would not be surprised if we see Watson involved early and often tomorrow night. A couple quick ones that I'm keeping an eye on as well. Calvin Ridley, if DeAndre Hopkins does not play for the Tennessee Titans, which is a real possibility. Remember, Hopkins got injured back in July. Sounds like he's going to be close to a game time call. If he's out, Calvin Ridley becomes far and away the number 1 target for Will Levis. I think that Bears-Titans game is going to be exciting. I think it's going to be back and forth. I think the Titans are going to have to score to keep up with Chicago. So I don't mind starting Calvin Ridley, especially if Hopkins is out. And then one more bonus, a quarterback who I like this week, Tua Tagovailoa, where he was going in drafts, he was often being taken as a second quarterback, but he's going up against a Jags defense that allowed almost 23 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks last season. That was the 5th most in the NFL. We got a really high total down in Miami. I would start Tua this week over Caleb Williams. I would start him over Brock Purdy going up against that Jets defense. I'd maybe even start him over Dak Prescott, who has to go on the road to Cleveland, and maybe guys, over Joe Burrow, who plays your Patriots.
Hey, Joe Burrow at home. I know I'm holding my breath on this defense for the Patriots. We'll get into that. I like that Joe Burrow start, but I love that nod of Christian Watson and Tua Tagovailoa while they're healthy and while that offense is healthy. Because, Nick, fantasy football is a week-by-week thing. Win each week, and then you get to the promised land. So who are the guys now? In that same breath, you talked about the guys that are must-start. Who are guys that maybe are in that same scope, but you're saying, you know what? I would sit them week 1.
Yeah, Keenan Allen is a name who comes to mind for me. And, the draft, the acquisition cost, I should say, for Keenan Allen was significantly lower this season than it's been in years past. And I tend to be a Keenan Allen believer. I think he still has one more good year left in him. I think he's kind of the safety blanket, the veteran in that receiver room for Caleb Williams. But, much like DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen is banged up. I think he's probably going to play, but could there be limited snaps? Could they try to feature Roma Dunze a bit more? There were some reports earlier in camp that Keenan Allen was a little bit overweight. So, he's certainly somebody that I ended up targeting because of the acquisition costs in a lot of my late drafts, but I'm probably not going to throw him out there in week 1. Guys, I'm just staying away early on from the Dallas backfield as well. I was more of a Rico Dowdle guy over Ezekiel Elliott. I want to see how it plays out, right? We have a bunch of backfields going into week 1 where we're just not really sure what that split is going to look like. And, going on the road to Cleveland against that defense, that kind of scares me. I mean, even if you make the right choice between Zeke and Dowdle, what's really the upside against this Cleveland team? I don't think it's very high. So I'm not starting Zeke or Dowdle unless I absolutely have to. Jalen Warren, he's another running back that I'm staying away from. And then Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. Tampa Bay, great defense in terms of limiting running backs in fantasy last season. They allowed only 7 rushing touchdowns on the year, only 2 receiving touchdowns to running backs last season. And of course, that applies to Austin Eckler as well. I've just been totally out on Eckler. I think his best days are behind him. But those are some of the running backs and receivers who I'll be staying away from this week.
I love you brought up that Dallas backfield. I was actually going to ask you about it later on, but let's address it right now. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott back in Dallas, coming off a career low in attempts when he was with the Patriots, but then there is those whispers of Rico Dowdle. Same height, 215, a little lighter. But how do you read this Dallas backfield? And now I want to look at it from like a season-wide scope, not just this week. Do you think it's Zeke's and then Dowdle with the younger legs eventually takes over?
I think it'll be a true split early on. And, to me, based on where both of those guys were being drafted, you didn't have to take them as your RB2. You didn't really even have to take them as your RB3, depending on how your draft played out. So you shouldn't necessarily be in a situation, unless you're in a deep league or, kind of a higher roster league where you feel like you need to start either of them. But again, like Dowdle to me is kind of the home run hitter for this offense, right? Zeke might be a little bit safer. You got to give Zeke credit for what he did in New England last season. If you had him in a PPR league, he wasn't as bad as you would think. I mean, he caught only 1 fewer pass on the entire season than Jahmyr Gibbs and Joe Mixon did. I mean, it was really the pass catching out of the backfield that salvaged his fantasy value. How much of that volume can we depend on now that he is in this timeshare with Rico Dowdle? He's a year older. It's a nice story, right? Zeke going back to Dallas, but I don't know, man. I mean, this feels like Tracy McGrady, like when he was on the Hawks, or Tracy McGrady on the Knicks. You're like, oh, all right, yeah, there's some name value here, but how much of an impact is he really going to make? And of course, they added Dalvin Cook as well. And I don't know if Dalvin Cook's ultimately going to make much of an impact here, but we knew Dallas was going to add somebody. They weren't comfortable with just the Dowdle and Zeke pairing. So now that you have this third veteran in the mix, and again, you're going up against the Cleveland Browns in week 1, I want to see how it plays out, before I fully buy in on either of those as a fantasy starter. But if I have to choose one, I'm going Rico Dowdle.
I like that. Rico Dowdle, long-term investment can pay off. And you're right. I mean, going into week 1, sit back, observe, figure out that Dallas offense and your roster as well. Let's talk Patriots. You brought them up. I mean, the Pats are going on the road to Cincinnati. But looking at this offense in general, and we can talk long-term, we can talk week 1, are there any fantasy-relevant pieces in this Patriots offense that you like?
Are there any fantasy relevant pieces? Sure. Are there any that I like? Maybe not. It's really just Ramondre Stevenson, right? I mean, unless you're in, like a 25 round league, and you'll see Jalen Polk maybe go late in the draft. The Patriots have essentially one player who goes in the top 150, right? I mean, it's Ramondre Stevenson, and that's about it. And I don't love this matchup for Ramondre. I don't love the Pats schedule, by the way, overall. I mean, this is for a team that might only win 3 or 4 games. Part of the reason for that is there are just no cupcakes. There are no cupcakes this season for New England. Obviously, you got 6 really difficult division games. Their out-of-division schedule is tough. Like, there's not a lot of spots you circle and say, all right, I love this spot for Ramondre Stevenson. It's just going to be volume-based. It's going to be volume-based as it was last season. I think we see a lot of those, like, 17 carries for 55 yards type of games. And you hope that he plunges one in from the 2-yard line. Maybe he gives you 4 or 5 catches out of the backfield from Jacoby Brissett. But I have a lot of concerns, as I'm sure you do as well, about the Patriots. I mean, it's not often you see a head coach openly discussing how terrible his own offensive line is 2 weeks before the season. I mean, you come out and say, yeah, Drake May, he's been better. He's been better than Brissett, but we literally cannot start him because we're worried about him getting killed because of this offensive line. And if you're worried about what that means for Drake May, I think you got to be worried about what it means for Stevenson.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this is an offense that will rely on the run. But again, the defenses they go up against, Cincinnati, we'll see how they do against the run this year. Seattle, the Jets, 49ers to start. But what you point out, I mean, the advice I gave to my buddy, in a different league, he drafted Ramondre Stevenson. I said, trade him as soon as you can because I don't know if the running lanes will be there. You're right, Nick. The offensive line hasn't been healthy all year. I don't like anyone from this piece, right. So you're right. That was a twofold question. Maybe Pop Douglas, just because he'll get a lot of targets. Yeah. But he's undersized, and I don't know if he can stay healthy. But again, this is an offense I'd kind of stay away. Are there any offenses that you look across and you say, I'm just going to stay away from these altogether?
Well, New England is certainly number one on that list for me. I've been staying away from the Raiders for the most part. I'm not really buying in on Zamir White. There's been some concerns there as far as what that workload could look like. Does Alexander Mattison work his way into the mix? And, as far as bad quarterbacking goes, like Gardner Minshew is a fairly fantasy-friendly quarterback. He's not Tim Boyle. He's not Zach Wilson. He's willing to air it out. There's going to be the pop games there. But when you look at the acquisition cost for someone like Devontae Adams, obviously he's a great player. He's a future Hall of Famer. I'm not buying him as a mid-second round pick. We saw a big step back from Devontae last season. I think that carries over to this year as well. It feels like he's kind of coasting on name value at this point. I don't even know if he's still on the Raiders, come the trade deadline. I think there's a real chance that they can move on from him. But I will say the one ex-Patriot and current Raider who I really like is Jacoby Myers. I mean, he's somebody who's had terrible quarterbacking his entire career, and yet all he does is produce. I mean, he racked up 106 targets in 16 games last season, basically the same number of targets as Nico Collins. He had more targets than Brandon Ayuk last season, 3 straight 800-yard seasons for Jacoby Myers, despite that bad QB play in both Vegas and New England. He found his way into the end zone 10 times last year. And look, if I'm sitting here saying that I think Devontae Adams might be traded midseason, what does that mean? It means Jacoby Myers might be the number one receiver for the Vegas Raiders come week 8 or 9.
Especially with an offense with Brock Bowers, your tight end they took in the first round, is already dealing with injuries himself. I love that you pointed out Jacoby Myers. Think the same thing. Devontae Adams is dealt. If he goes to New York, that affects Garrett Wilson, but that upticks on Myers. Now looking at the league as a whole, we know CMC finished as a number one fantasy player last season. Who do you think finishes as a number one player in fantasy football this season?
It's a really interesting question. Part of it, of course, depends on your league settings. If you're in a non-PPR league, then it's probably not going to be a receiver who ends up earning that title. And for what it's worth, in terms of total fantasy production in PPR leagues, a quarterback has been the top overall player in 5 of the last 7 seasons. So that is something to keep in mind. But saying a quarterback for this question is boring. I'm not going to go in that direction. So I think to look at the running backs first, the obvious answer is Christian McCaffrey, but I went through yesterday. I looked up the data from the last decade in terms of fantasy production. No running back has finished as the top fantasy RB in PPR leagues in consecutive seasons. Now, McCaffrey has done it twice in that. Came back in his days with the Carolina Panthers. So history suggests that somebody else, some other running back, will be the top running back in terms of PPR this season. With that said, CMC was the top running back by more than 100 fantasy points last year. So he has some wiggle room. Like, he could miss a game, and if he produces at the same level as last year, he could still be the RB1. He was 7.5 fantasy points per game better than the second best fantasy running back last year, which is Breece Hall. That is a crazy, crazy split. If CMC stays healthy, he has to be the guy. I'm not veering away from that. But again, that's the boring answer. I think there's a case for Breece Hall. I think there's a case for Bijan Robinson in Atlanta if that team hits the ground running. But if you're looking for a dark horse, how about Travis Etienne in Jacksonville? He was the RB3 last season, and he barely eclipsed 1,000 yards. I mean, a lot of it was pass catching. A lot of it was volume. The Jaguars' offensive line, we'll see. I'm actually a Jaguars fan. I should disclose that to you before I talk about Etienne. I'm not optimistic, but they can't be any worse than they were last season. Etienne got almost 60 passes last year, but only had one receiving touchdown. I think if Travis Etienne can move closer to 1,300 yards, maybe keep that same receiving volume, find the end zone 4 or 5 times. If McCaffrey takes a step back or if he gets hurt, Travis Etienne would be kind of my dark horse running back who could grab that title.
Shout out to Nick Whalen of RotoWire, also SiriusXM host for fantasy football on their NBA show as well. He's awesome. Love those start sit-ems. I love the outlook he had, Colin, talking about CMC. Like, my ears perked when he's like, does CMC repeat it? But at the end, he goes, I can't bet against him because of just how good he was as a running back. And I also just love him pointing out of, like, I asked him, you guys heard it right there, of, are there fantasy relevant Patriots that you want on your team? He goes, fantasy relevant, yes. On my team, no. That's the outlook. And like, that's what I told my buddy. He drafted Ramondre Stevenson. I was like, dude, trade him as soon as you can while there's any value you could get in return. You get him late in the draft. Obviously, I know there's ADP value. This is going to be an offense, Colin, that's just going to be so bad. I don't know who's going to score week to week. And fantasy football is all about winning week to week. It's not about how you draft. It's how you adapt week to week in your league.
Yeah, if Ramondre gets a couple touchdowns, if he falls into the end zone 1 week, you get him off your team immediately. Real quick, I know we got to head out in a hurry here, but as a reward for everyone who's tuned into the show till the end, I'm going to give my biggest sleeper for this fantasy football season. It's Dallas Cowboys running back Rico Dowdle. He's basically unopposed in this running game. The only other person is the decaying corpse of Ezekiel Elliott. Rico Dowdle runs harder, runs faster. He's a good pass blocker too. I think by the end of the season, you're going to see Rico Dowdle's name in the top 20 at the position. Right now, he is going undrafted in some leagues, well outside the top 150. So do yourself a favor. If he's on your waiver wire right now, go pick him up. And if you're somehow still drafting after Thursday Night Football, draft him to your team.
Yeah, and if you're drafting after Thursday Night Football, go join a new league. You should be drafting before Thursday Night Football. But I love that sleeper pick. He's Khalin Kapoor. I'm George Balekji in the PNC Bank studio. This was Boston's End of the Chat. Shout out Nick Whalen for joining the show. Shout out to everyone tuning in. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your Friday night NFL game. We'll see you guys Monday morning.